DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is corporate greed versus capitalism. Are these the same thing? Are they different? We're going to dive into that here today. Before we get started, let me remind you all of two things. First of all, my text message line, once we reactivate that, those messages will be going straight to your phone. For anyone who's in my text community, send a text to my number, which is down below in the description of this episode. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. That is where I do my coaching. That's where you can have me as your coach. That's where you can get access to all of our training materials and courses on everything around mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability, and everything underneath those headers. And you get access to me as your direct coach in live conversations with me and direct access to me. That is all at workonyourgameuniversity.com. That link is down below in the description to this episode, wherever you're consuming this. So this topic, corporate greed versus capitalism. So you all know that I'm an active social media user, specifically on an app called X, which we used to call Twitter, but now is called X since Elon Musk bought the company and took it over maybe a year or two ago. Now, I was on this app just recently, and I saw someone talking about someone's using this phrase corporate greed, and the example that the person was sharing, they were talking about how Chipotle, for example, yes, the food shop Chipotle had decided to raise their prices. And when Chipotle decided to raise their prices, people were, of course, bitching about it. This is what people do when prices go up. In case any of you didn't know, prices are always going up, and prices will never stop going up. Prices are always going up. They are not going down. They're always going up. And if they do go down, that means we have some type of anarchy in our society, which I don't think many of you are ready to deal with. And people were saying, well, Chipotle did this, and then they took in this much in profits last year, and the CEO got this much of a bonus, and they took this much and put it into, it was something else they were saying that the company itself did, because Chipotle is a big company that makes hundreds of millions of dollars. And they were saying, well, this is just pure corporate greed. That's what the person was saying. And I've heard people use this phrase corporate greed a lot. And it got me to thinking, well, everything that the person described about Chipotle, assuming that they were telling the truth. I didn't go fact check their numbers, but assuming that they did tell the truth, that Chipotle did raise their price and that they did make this much in profit, and they did give the CEO this much of a bonus, and they did put this much away in stock and all this stuff. Assuming everything they said was true, I said, isn't that just capitalism? Isn't that what you're supposed to do when you're running a business in a capitalistic society, which is try to help the company make as much money as possible, and then you do things strategically with the money so that you and your company can keep as much of the money as possible? I mean, what about this makes it corporate greed as opposed to just being straight up capitalism? I just didn't understand. And I posted the question as a response to what this person was saying, and they didn't really give an answer to the question. I was just trying to figure it out. I was just trying to understand, what is it? So on X, people talk about these social issues all the time. And when I hear people use this term corporate greed, and I hear them explaining it, their justification for calling something corporate greed is just explaining how a company is making a whole lot of money. That's really what it comes down to. If a company's making a whole lot of money, then they're somehow greedy corporate folks. But if the company is, I don't know, doing something else, then they're not greedy. I don't understand what makes a company greedy versus what makes a company more noble, I guess, for a lack of a better term. I haven't quite figured that out, or I had not, excuse me. I had not quite figured it out, but good news is I have figured it out. That's what we're going to explain here today. Because when people call a corporation greedy, again, as I just said, I posed the question, it doesn't seem that much different than capitalism. Capitalism encourages you to run your business, make money, generate profit, and I'm trying to find a difference. When corporations run their business, make money, and generate profit, they're greedy, or are they capitalists? And I was just trying to figure out, why do we have these two different terms? And I found out some interesting things that I'm going to share here today. May I share them with you? Would you be open to finding out what they are? Good. Point number one. Topic once again is corporate greed versus capitalism. Point number one, according to Chat GPT. Okay, so I asked Chat GPT the question, what's the difference? Here's what they said. Open quote. The distinction between corporate greed and capitalism lies in intent, ethics, and the broader impact of business practices. Period. Close quote. Now they said a whole lot more than that, but this is the essence of what they answered. Then they went and gave examples. And this is a perfect explanation that frames exactly the topic that the conversation that I want to have here today, because this makes the distinction between the two completely subjective, if you didn't notice. Listen to those words again. Intent, which is subjective. In other words, judging what someone else is trying to do. That's very subjective. Ethics, also a subjective term, but it's a more powerful term than intent. Ethics is a much more powerful term because you can use ethics against a person to make them seem morally wrong or make yourself seem morally superior to another person. And broader impact of business practices, which again, the impact of your business practices you can impact 1,000 different things with your business practices. Which ones are people going to point out? If they want to make you look good, they'll point out the good stuff that your business does. They want to point out the bad, they'll point out the bad stuff that your business does, or at least what they consider to be bad. And this is why these terms are all subjective. This is why they're tricky, and it's why very smart people use these terms to manipulate others who don't understand the language games that they're playing. This is the reason why I did an entire episode where I told you about the satanic attack on language. That was episode number 2605. People are playing games with language because they are able to trick you because you don't understand what they're doing. And this is the reason why, one of the reasons why I exist in the marketplace, to point out their bullshit so that you don't become subject to it. You cannot tell someone else what their intents are. You can judge someone's intent. You can guess, you can theorize another person's intent. You can't tell someone your intention was to rob your customers if they didn't say that their intention was to rob the customers. Again, you can draw your own conclusion, but you can't tell someone and say objectively and definitively, this was your intent. Now, that's not possible. Ethics are flexible and they are malleable depending on who's talking and about whom they are speaking. And the broader impact of business practices has a lot to do with many factors in addition to the specific actions that a business takes or does not take. For example, if Walmart opens a store in your neighborhood and a bunch of other businesses go out of business, does that make Walmart a greedy corporation? Or does it make Walmart just a capitalistic company that built their business by putting competitors out of business? Isn't that what they're supposed to do? That's what capitalism is about, is that you are in competition. I have a show. You're listening to this show right now. The opportunity cost of listening to my show is that you're not listening to anybody else's show. I'm in competition with other people who have shows. Doesn't mean you can't listen to 10 different podcasts a day if you want to, but if you don't have a lot of time one day, you can only listen to 3 podcasts. I want to be one of those 3. I don't want to be one of the 7 on the cutting room floor. So I'm in competition with everybody else. Competition is the essence of capitalism, is that things are designed to where we compete, and whoever competes the best wins. That's the way it works. Mind you, everybody, I come from the sports world. In the sports world, it is competition. It is player against player, team against team, man against man. And you have to beat the person in front of you. And if you don't beat them, you lose. All right? That's the way the game works. And I don't have a problem with that. That's the way I want the game to work. Why would it not work that way? So this whole concept of the broader impact of business practices, again, you can pick and choose whatever you want to pick and choose. For example, they give you an example of people picking and choosing. One of my favorite rappers of all time is a guy named Jay-Z. His wife is Beyonce, if you don't know who Jay-Z is. Jay-Z was recently named in what looked to be a civil lawsuit or some type of announcement made by a lawyer that allegedly Jay-Z sexually assaulted some young underage girl many years ago. Now, whether it's true or not is irrelevant, and especially not talking about it now. But what is interesting is that when the allegations got levied and thrown out there against Jay-Z, the way people responded to it was very interesting to me, because there were a lot of people who said, well, actually, Jay-Z himself, he put out a statement that was kind of out of character for Jay-Z, because he was a person who was well known for, in the years in his heyday as a rapper, he would very rarely would he directly respond to another rapper who said something about him, or rappers would have to talk about him a whole lot before he responded to anybody. He generally was kind of floating above the fray of other rappers going back and forth with each other, even when they were talking about him. So him immediately responding, or more like a reaction to this lawyer putting this statement out, it seemed very out of character for Jay-Z. But one of the things that he said was, He mentioned how he operates by a certain code of honor and a code of ethics, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so terrible to see children, because Jay-Z has children, losing their innocence because now they're going to hear about some allegation against daddy, and he's going to have to sit down and explain this to his kids. And he was basically speaking from this morally superior position as he reacted to this lawyer putting this claim out there into the world. And I found it very interesting because Jay-Z, even though I'm a fan of Jay-Z, we can still keep it real about Jay-Z, that he built his career based on the acceptance by the public that he used to be a street guy who was dealing drugs and dealt so much drugs that he made so much money that he was able to build a business based on the money that he made selling drugs. And then he got into the rap game and he rapped about selling drugs for many years. He still will drop a hint or two about drug dealing in his raps to this very day, even though he doesn't really put out music anymore. So it was very interesting to me that he was talking about his code of honor and ethics and basically framing himself as morally superior to a lawyer who has actually served in the military, while Jay-Z was a drug dealer serving drugs to his own community. It was just an interesting juxtaposition between the way he was presenting himself and the way he came out in the first place. And a lot of Jay-Z fans, I am a fan of Jay-Z, but I'm not a idolizer of Jay-Z. There's a big difference. A lot of his idolizers, idolaters, I guess you call them, those people were coming out and defending him blindly, like, well, there's no way Jay-Z could have done this. Like, how do you know? We don't know. Again, the case could be completely nonsense. The allegation can be complete nonsense, thin as tissue paper, or there could be some legs to it. The point is not whether or not it's true or not, because we don't know. It would have to go to court for us to find out. And if it never goes to court, the point that I'm making, whether it goes to court or not, is that for him to stand there and position himself as morally superior when he was literally a drug dealer selling drugs to his own community is a very rich position for Jay-Z to take. And again, I say this as a fan of Jay-Z. I'm bringing all that up to say that when we talk about these subjective terms like ethics and intent and broader impact of your business practices, well, what's the broader impact of Jay-Z's business practice? What about the crack babies that grew up based on the crack that their moms took that got sold to them by Jay-Z? Does that go on his resume? Or the great things he's done, like charitable donations and the music he's put out that has helped people through situations and been the soundtrack to people's lives. And again, I listen to Jay-Z a lot. So there's a positive, there's a negative, there's a trade-off for both sides. And Jay-Z will say things like, he said this in his raps, that I believe that the good that I've done has outweighed the bad that I did. Fine if you want to look at it like that, but anybody would say that. And there are people who will go against him and say, no, it hasn't. There are people who go against Jay-Z and say, no, it hasn't. Who's right, who's wrong? Nobody. It's just a matter of which perspective do you decide to take. So the main difference between corporate greed and capitalism, folks, all lies in the way that the person talking about it feels about how the person talking about it feels about the company or person being discussed. That's really what it comes down to. Do you think Elon Musk is a great capitalist, or do you think he's a greedy capitalist? Do you think Chipotle is a great company, or do you think they're a greedy company? Is Walmart, when they move into town, they put all the local mom and pop shops out of business, are they just doing capitalism and winning, or are they a greedy corporation who's hurting the local economy? Which one are they? There's no right or wrong answer to the question. The point is, if you look at things the way that I look at things, then you would say, hey, this is just straight up competition. If you can't compete with Walmart, then you gotta pack it up and take it home. You gotta go home. You can't compete. This is the business world. Same way that if an athlete comes into a space and they're just beating everybody, well, hey, if you can't compete with them, you can't complain about the fact that they exist. You just gotta get better. Or you gotta go somewhere else where you can win. This is the way the game works. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is corporate greed versus capitalism. Number 2, every business is designed with the idea of creating value and exchanging that value for money. All right, that's the purpose of having a business. You create some form of value, you exchange it for money, product, service, experience, etc. And you exchange it for money, also called selling. And the society we live in has created this belief that anytime someone or something is making a lot more money than everybody else, again, think Walmart versus the local businesses that get put out of business when Walmart moves into town, that the person who's making the most must be doing something negative or nefarious or malicious in order to make more than their quote unquote fair share. All right, first of all, when we're talking competition, there is no fair share. All right, so let's put that to rest from the beginning. If we are competing, there's no fair share. We're competing, then my goal is to beat you. And the worse I beat you, the more satisfying my victory. All right, that's the way it works. So there's no fair share when we're in competition. You can get in competition, you might get beat. All right, that's the way that the game works. Anybody didn't know, now you know. So who decides what's the fair share? All right, this is the existential question. Who decides what is the fair share? Corporate greed is defined as excessive or unethical profit-seeking behavior at the expense of employees, consumers, communities, or the environment. Again, that's a very rich definition. Let me read it one more time, just in case you didn't catch it. Corporate greed is defined as excessive or unethical profit-seeking behavior at the expense of employees, consumers, communities, or the environment. Let's pause and just break this definition down. First of all, who decides what's excessive when it comes to profit seeking? How many of you have ever made so much profit that you felt like you made too much? Let me give a little bit back. I made too much profit. There's no such thing as making too much profit, because the more profit you take in, the more resources you now have to do whatever you want to do with it. You want to do good things, do good. You want to do bad things, do bad. But it's your money. You do what you want to do. So there's no such thing as excessive profit seeking. So this definition itself makes no sense, because corporate greed is a made up term that people came up with to try to demonize people who are doing more business than they're doing, or doing a lot of business and you're just mad at them. So you have to come up with a negative term to describe it, because if you just called it capitalism, then it wouldn't be negative enough, and you wouldn't be able to influence and persuade people to think badly about the company. So you need to come up with a better term that sounds more persuasive. Corporate greed does sound persuasive, and it can make some people sheepish about the fact that they're in a corporation that's making a lot of money. And I'm making this episode to make sure that you don't fall for this bullshit. Again, whether you are a consumer of it or you're someone in the game. So unethical profit seeking, what the hell does that mean? Unethical. Well, a judge can decide what's ethical and what's not ethical. All right, again, that's a very subjective term. And then they say at the expense of employees. So what does this mean? Again, if I'm running a business, and I told you all the story, there's a Burger King in my neighborhood. The Burger King had put a fence around it. I thought they were about to tear the building down. They didn't tear the building down. All they did was remodel it. 2 weeks later, it was open again. And what they did was replace the counters where a person would take your order, and they replaced it with LED order boards. So now, instead of talking to a person to place your order for a burger and fries and a drink, now you put it into a board, and instead of having 5 people at the front registers taking your orders, now the boards take the order. So those 5 people got fired, and now the people in the back make the food, and Burger King saved themselves a lot of money by firing those employees. They replaced them with computers. Now, is that at the expense of those employees who now no longer have a job? Yes, it is. Does that make Burger King unethical? No, it doesn't. It means they're doing what makes the most sense for their business, which is what they're supposed to do. That's the point of business. Do what makes the most sense for your business. Not what makes the most sense for the employees, what makes the most sense for the business. That's the mandate of running a business, is to increase value for the shareholders. The shareholders are just the people who have ownership of the business. Not increase value for employees. If an employee is not a shareholder, then they have no say in how the business should be run. You just do what you're told, because that's what a job is defined as. You do what you're told and you get paid for it. When we decide we don't want you anymore, you're fired for any reason or for no reason at all. That's the way it works. Then they say at the expense of consumers. Again, what does this mean? If Chipotle raises their prices, if a steak bowl costs $15.30 and now it's going to cost $15.75, is that at the expense of consumers? Well, technically, yes, because consumers now have to spend more money to get the steak bowl. But if it costs you more money to pay for the supplies, or you just decide you want to raise the prices because you're giving more value and you want to generate more profits and you believe your stuff is worth more, is there something wrong with you raising the price? Hell no. If I decide to raise the prices of what I sell, that doesn't mean I'm doing it at the expense of you. You still have the option of not buying it. You don't have to buy it if you don't like the price. But it doesn't mean I'm being greedy, and it doesn't mean I'm unethical in any way just because I raised the price. You still have the option of buying or not buying. So this whole concept is nonsense. And they say the expense of communities. Again, what does that even mean? Or the environment. Again, what does this even mean? Yes, there are examples of all of these things, but again, they're very subjective, because you can just pick and choose which points you want to point out based on whether you want to make somebody look good or you want to make them look bad. Now, some of these cases can technically be proven in court, as I mentioned. It still comes down to a subjective decision. Companies lay off employees all the time. Consumers see prices go up every day. And everything in life has some form of trade-off, which means somebody has to pay for everything. So if the cost of goods go up, then somebody has to pay for that additional cost. So when does the line get crossed into greed? When does it become greed? Simple answer is it depends on who's talking. And that's what makes this all tricky. That's why this whole concept of corporate greed is tricky, because it's all based on who's talking and how they feel about the situation. So if they like you, you're just a great capitalist. If they hate you, you're greedy. So Donald Trump, for example, is noted for being a billionaire. And Kamala Harris, during the 2024 election campaign, mentioned many times, Donald Trump's just trying to help out his billionaire friends. But at the same time, Kamala Harris went and hired Beyonce, who was allegedly a billionaire herself, to come and promote Kamala Harris to be president of the United States. So isn't that one of your billionaire friends, Kamala? So what's the difference? Donald Trump having billionaire friends is a bad thing, but you having a billionaire friend who's trying to help you get elected to president, that's a good thing. That you're just doing good, honorable stuff, but what he's doing is bad stuff. What's the difference? So you see how easily people play these games? And again, if you don't think about it the way that I think about it, you might not notice this stuff, but I notice it. This is why I'm talking about it. So this is why this very concept is much more of a subjective pejorative. Pejorative just means a term you're using as a way to try to make somebody look bad, the same way that somebody would call someone MAGA as an insult. Oh, you're just a dumb MAGA person. All right, they use it as a pejorative. It's an insult, and more than as a provable fact. See, calling someone greedy is an insult more than it's a provable fact. You can't prove that somebody's greedy. Again, what makes somebody greedy? Again, this is why I don't like the term. Moving on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is corporate greed versus capitalism. Number 3, they say that corporate greed is about short-term thinking, prioritizing immediate profits over long-term sustainability or societal well-being, or they'll use terms such as affordability or maximizing shareholder returns. They say all of these things fall under the umbrella of being a greedy corporation. You're only thinking short-term. Problem with that term is, how do you know what another person's thinking? You can see the results of their behaviors, but you don't know what they were thinking. My intent might be long-term success, but we only get short-term success, and in the long run, it doesn't work out. Does that mean I was greedy from the beginning? If my intent was positive? If my intent was long-term success, but all I got was short-term success, does that make me greedy? Again, by definition, it would, but it shouldn't, because the intent part, I don't check the box, but on the outcome part, I do. So which one is it? All right, so see how these things get tricky? Prioritizing immediate profits over long-term sustainability. Again, how do you know what someone else is prioritizing? Just because I make immediate profits does not mean I'm prioritizing immediate profits. Doesn't mean I won't make money. Again, what am I supposed to do? Not make money to appease you in your bullshit definition? Somebody explain to me how this makes sense. Or you also hear terms such as affordability or maximizing shareholder returns. First of all, if you run a business, it is your duty to maximize shareholder returns. And if you're not doing it, you deserve to be fired. That's the way business works. Your job in business is to maximize shareholder returns. That means the people who own the business want to make money. That's the reason why they are part of ownership of the business, to make money. So maximizing shareholder returns is your job. Now, it doesn't mean you do things that are illegal in order to maximize shareholder returns. You don't do things that are going to hurt the business in the long run, hopefully, to maximize shareholder returns. But it is still your job to maximize shareholder returns. People acting like this is not a thing is ridiculous. And then they talk about affordability. Again, who's the judge? If I go to the Porsche dealership and my budget for a car is less than the cheapest Porsche that they have, does that make Porsche greedy because I cannot afford the car? Is out of my range of affordability. Does that make Porsche bad? No, I can just go to the Kia dealership or the Toyota dealership and I can probably find something in my price range. Or does that make Porsche bad? I don't think so. So again, you see how easily these things fall apart when you just when you just dig into them? A consumer not being able to afford my product does not make me bad. Who's the judge of whether a company is doing that or not? If a company gains short-term profits, it does not make them greedy. Maybe it means they're just taking advantage of the opportunity in front of them, which is completely fine as long as they're doing it within the confines of the law. How do we know if a short-term action will lead to long-term sustainability or long-term ruin? We don't know, because if we could predict the future, then the people writing these bullshit definitions and talking about them in college campuses, they'd be running businesses instead. If you could know exactly what the outcome of every action will be. Again, why are you wasting your knowledge on a college campus? You can be running a business, making as much money as you want. You can go teach your knowledge on YouTube for free. You don't need to check. So all of this stuff, we don't know until we get the long-term answers to these things. So saying that a company is focusing on short-term results, even if they end up with short-term results and not long-term results, doesn't mean that was their focus. That just means that's the result. Again, how many of you have ever tried to do one thing, but the outcome was something completely different? So does that mean we can judge your intent? No, because sometimes you just get it wrong. That happens because humans run businesses, by the way, in case any of you forgot. So societal well-being is a flimsy catch-all term no matter how you use it, because well-being, again, is extremely subjective. And it depends on who's talking, who they're talking about. Another thing the ChatGPT definition says is doing things such as looking for unfair advantages or misleading consumers. If that's the definition of corporate greed, then every corporation is guilty of it, because every corporation looks for unfair advantages. We just talked about this yesterday. If you're a winner in life, you should be looking for every unfair advantage that is available to you and exploiting every single one of them. All right. You want unfair advantages. In other words, you want to go to places that are more suited for your skill set than they are for other people, which makes it easier for you to win. Doesn't mean it won't be easy, but it should be easier for you to win because you're putting your efforts into that thing and other people aren't. You want unfair advantages. And they say misleading consumers. Again, what does that even mean? All right. Every business misleads consumers because we need to get people into a certain frame of mind in order to buy a product. How many of you ever bought a product that ended up being a piece of junk? All right, did the company mislead you? In a way, yeah, they did. That's what they're supposed to do. And I'm not saying they're supposed to mislead you all the time. What I'm saying is they're supposed to they're supposed to understand your way of thinking and get your way of thinking to align with the action that they want you to take. You can call that misleading. You can call it manipulation. You can call it selling. Call it whatever you want. The whole point is that's the point of a business, is to get people to do things that they otherwise knew they needed to do, or a salesperson rather, but they won't move themselves to do. So whatever you need to do to move them to that action, you move them to that action. Again, you call it misleading, that sounds like you're doing something illegal or unethical. You call it manipulation, also sounds like that. But this is what sales is. Sales is about getting people to think a certain way so that they will take a certain action and achieve a certain outcome that they otherwise, again, they couldn't do it on their own, so they need you to help them out. That's the reason why salespeople are salespeople. Because if people could do this on their own, we wouldn't need salespeople. You just present the products and people just buy shit. It doesn't work that way. We wouldn't need advertising, no marketing, no billboards, no ads on YouTube videos. We wouldn't need any of it if people just did what they knew they needed to do. But we need salespeople because people won't do what they need to do. Every company lobbies for unfair advantages. Every company angles for unfair advantages and within the capitalistic system, because that's the point. Again, this will make every human being on the planet guilty if we were judging people by these metrics. Even you would be guilty of it. It says that corporate greed leads to economic inequality. Well, we already got a bunch of economic inequalities. So does that mean every corporation is greedy? Because they're all involved. It says the corporate greed, no, we already have economic inequality. All right, and it's only getting wider. The inequality is only getting bigger. It's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. The fact of the matter is, folks, capitalism rewards greed. Capitalism rewards greed. The harder you go after getting more of what you want, the more rewards you get. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Greed is a good thing. The only time greed is looked at as a bad thing is when people who have not taken advantage of it decide to put the spotlight on those who have, which means, in conclusion, in case you haven't caught it, I'm not a fan of this concept at all. All right, the same way I'm not a fan of corporate social responsibility, another bullshit phrase that got made up by people who want to make corporations feel guilty about their success and then basically blackmail them into giving from their resources to the community or to society as a whole as a way of evening out their success, balancing out the success that they've created. It's a nonsense concept. And fortunately for people who push this garbage, it's actually worked on them, because there are a lot of companies who buy into this corporate social responsibility bullshit. I don't, but I understand there are a lot of companies who do. With that said, let's recap today's class, which is corporate greed versus capitalism. And again, I saw this on social media, people calling a company greedy. They were talking about Chipotle specifically. And I said, well, how is that any different from capitalism? The person didn't answer because there is no answer. Point number one, according to ChatGPT, the distinction between corporate greed and capitalism lies in intent, ethics, and a broader impact of business practices. These are all very subjective terms, which makes the entire concept subjective, which is why it's nonsense, because you can manipulate people very easily with this stuff. Number two, every business is designed with the idea of creating value, and that gets exchanged for money. Society we lived in has created this belief that anytime someone or something is making more than others, that there's some type of unethical thing going on. That's not the way that it works, folks. This is a competition. Capitalism is a competition. That's the reason why there's so many parallels between the business world and the sports world, because it's straight up competition, winners and losers, clear objective realities. And a lot of people don't want to buy into that because they'd rather buy into your feelings and emotions. And unfortunately, this is what many of you have been taught for 20 or 30 years of your life. I'm not here to change your mind, but if you listen to me often enough, we will undo the bullshit that you've been taught. Number three, they say that corporate greed is about short-term thinking, prioritizing immediate profits over long-term sustainability or societal well-being, or they'll talk about affordability or maximizing shareholder returns. The problems with all of these terms is that they're very subjective. You can pick and choose facts that verify either side of each one of those points, which makes it really undefinable because, again, you can use it in any way. You can use it to attack, you can use it to praise. And if someone can't see through the bullshit that you're using, you can very easily persuade and manipulate a lot of people to think one way when they should be thinking another way, if they understood it on the level at which I'm breaking it down here today. That's the reason why I exist in the marketplace. All that said, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com so that you learn how to put yourself and your work out there to where you can be greedy, because you got a lot of people who are greedy to get your stuff because you're giving them something that they want. They will happily give you their resources in exchange for your resources. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all